The sun was just beginning to set over the endless golden desert of the southwest. Warm light poured across the land, touching the dry earth, the crooked fences, and the long stretch of open road. Dust swirled softly in the warm wind as if the ground itself was breathing. Out here, everything moved slowly, except the wind and the horses. James Holloway leaned against a wooden fence post, squinting toward the horizon. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, sun-browned skin, and a calm way about him. He wasn't young anymore, but he was still strong and quick. People around these parts called him the quiet cowboy, because he never spoke more than he needed to. He had worked hard his whole life, moving cattle, trading horses, and helping travelers who passed through the wild country. James loved the land, the wide skies, the sound of horses, the feeling of a day's work done honestly. He was the kind of man who believed that what you gave to the world, it would give back. That evening, as he wiped the sweat from his forehead, he thought it would be just another quiet night. But that sunset would change everything. Far in the distance, a thin cloud of dust was rising. It grew larger, moving closer fast. James straightened his back and narrowed his eyes. Someone was coming, and they were in a hurry. It wasn't unusual to see travelers, but something about the way the horse moved told him this was different. The rider was pushing the animal hard, maybe too hard. Within minutes, the sound of hoofbeats filled the air. A man rode into James's camp. His shirt was torn, his hair messy, and his eyes wild with fear and exhaustion. The horse beneath him was breathing heavily, almost stumbling from the long ride. James didn't speak right away. He let the man catch his breath. "Water, please," the man gasped, sliding off the horse. James nodded calmly and handed him a tin cup filled with cool water from a barrel. The man drank quickly, his hands shaking. "You look like you've been running from something," James said in his low, steady voice. The man nodded nervously. "I need a horse," he blurted out. "A fast one. I'll give you anything." James raised an eyebrow. People sometimes offered strange things when they were desperate. He didn't usually make quick trades, but something about the man's panic told him this was serious. "What do you have to trade?" James asked carefully. The man turned back toward the wagon he had left near the road. James followed his gaze. For the first time, he noticed someone sitting in the back, quiet, still. As the man pulled back the canvas flap, James saw a young woman. Her hands were tied with a thin rope, but she sat tall, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Her face was calm, not frightened, and her eyes were sharp and bright, like she was watching everything, remembering everything. "I can give you her," the man said breathlessly. "Take her. Just give me the horse." James froze. His first thought was that this was wrong. He had traded many things in his life: horses, cattle, saddles, but never a person. He didn't believe anyone belonged to anyone else. He didn't know who she was or why the man was offering her, but something in his chest tightened. This wasn't how decent folks did things. The woman lifted her chin slightly, looking straight at James. She didn't say a word. She didn't cry. Her silence was powerful, almost louder than the man shouting. It made James pause. "Who is she?" James asked. "Does it matter?" The man snapped. "She's not mine. I got her from someone else. Just give me the horse." James didn't like the sound of that. But he also knew one thing clearly. If he let the man leave with her, there was no telling what might happen to her. If he took her, maybe he could keep her safe, maybe figure out who she was and help her. He didn't know her story yet, but his instincts told him this was a crossroads. James let out a slow breath. "Untie her," he said firmly. The man hesitated. James didn't raise his voice, but something in the way he spoke made the man obey. He quickly untied the rope from her wrists and stepped back. James walked toward the stable and led out one of his strong, healthy horses. He handed the reins over. The man grabbed them, climbed onto the horse, and rode off fast, leaving behind nothing but a trail of dust and the sound of hooves fading into the distance. When the dust settled, the woman was still sitting on the edge of the wagon, her hands free now. She didn't move, but she watched James closely. He noticed she wasn't weak or helpless. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, almost proud. She was clearly someone with courage in her heart. "You're safe now," James said softly. She didn't reply. She just gave the smallest nod. Her eyes told him that she understood every word, even without speaking. James offered her some water and a blanket. She took the water carefully, sipping slowly. The blanket she didn't need. She sat tall, not like someone who was used to being pitied. James respected that. He didn't ask questions that night. Instead, He led her to a small cabin near the edge of his land, a place where she could rest. As they walked together through the quiet desert evening, James began to notice small details about her. She moved with purpose. Her steps were light and sure, as if she had walked across this kind of land many times. She didn't stumble on the rough path or seem afraid of the sounds of coyotes in the distance. She looked at the stars above as if they were old friends guiding her home. Inside the cabin, James lit a lantern. Its warm glow filled the small space, showing the wooden table, a bed in the corner, and a shelf with a few books and a folded blanket. He pulled out some bread and dried fruit, placing it on the table. She sat across from him, still silent, but her eyes explored the room carefully. Not like someone curious, but like someone trained to observe everything around her. "I don't know your name," James said after a while. She didn't speak, but then slowly she touched her chest and said softly, "Naya." Her voice was gentle but strong. One word, it was enough. "Naya," James repeated, nodding. "I'm James." For the first time, her lips curved into a small, cautious smile. It wasn't a big smile, but it told him she didn't see him as a threat. That was a start. That night, Naya rested on the bed while James sat outside under the stars. He thought about what had just happened. He wasn't a man who liked getting involved in other people's troubles, but something about this woman felt important. She didn't act like someone broken or lost. She acted like someone waiting for the right moment to rise again. As the crickets chirped and the wind moved gently through the grass, James made a quiet promise to himself. He would protect her until he could figure out the truth. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he knew one thing clearly. He couldn't let anything bad happen to her. The next morning, James woke up early, as he always did. The sun was just touching the tops of the hills with a soft pink light. When he opened the cabin door, he saw Naya was already awake. She stood outside barefoot, her dark hair blowing in the morning breeze. She was watching the sunrise like it was a ceremony. "You're up early," James said with a small smile. She didn't answer, but she turned to look at him with a calm expression, as if to say, "I've always been up early." He admired that quiet strength in her. He offered her breakfast, warm cornbread and water. She accepted politely, though she ate slowly like someone who was used to making everything last. James noticed something else too. She wasn't just watching the land. She was reading it. Her eyes followed the tracks in the dirt, the movement of the wind, even the flight of a hawk overhead. She was connected to this place in a way James had never seen before. All day, Naya stayed close to the cabin but didn't seem frightened or lost. She was silent but not weak. James worked with the horses as usual, but he kept an eye on her. At one point, she walked up to a nervous mare that even James had trouble calming. Without a single word, Naya slowly reached out and touched the animal's neck. To James's surprise, the mare stopped moving and relaxed, letting her stroke its mane gently. It was as if Naya spoke the language of the land and the creatures on it. That night, as James sat by the fire, Naya sat across from him again. They didn't need many words. He could see it in her eyes. She had a story, a big one. He just didn't know it yet. The days that followed moved quietly, but something inside James told him that this was only the beginning. He didn't know that the woman he had accepted to keep safe was not just any traveler. She carried a secret that could change everything around them. She had strength in her silence, leadership in her eyes, and a story that reached far beyond the horizon. James thought he had simply helped someone in need, but in truth, fate had just placed him at the edge of something much larger. A journey of trust, discovery, and a bond between two worlds that would soon collide. James woke up before dawn that day, just as the sky was turning from deep blue to soft gray. The air was cool and the world was quiet except for the sound of the wind moving gently through the grass. Naya was already awake, standing a few steps away from the cabin. She looked peaceful, her face turned toward the horizon as if she was listening to something the wind was trying to tell her. Over the past few days, James had grown used to her silence. It was not a heavy silence. It was calm, strong, and full of meaning. She never seemed afraid. Instead, she moved through the world like someone who belonged deeply to it. She watched, she listened, and she remembered. And James, though he didn't say it out loud, had begun to respect her more with every passing day. That morning, something felt different. The air was still, as if holding its breath. The horses were restless in their pens. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual. James trusted his instincts. They had kept him alive in many unpredictable moments. He could feel that change was coming, though he didn't yet know what kind. He saddled his horse and checked the gate. When he returned, Naya was standing near the fence looking at the distant hills. There was a soft expression in her eyes, like she was remembering something important. Then she turned to him and, for the first time since they met, spoke more than a single word. "They are coming," she said softly. James frowned. "Who?" She pointed toward the hills. "My people." James followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing, but after a few moments faint shapes began to appear in the distance, small figures moving steadily toward them. They weren't rushing. They moved like people who knew exactly where they were going. James felt his heartbeat quicken. He didn't know whether this was good news or bad, but he trusted Naya. If she said they were coming, they were. Within an hour, the shapes became clear. A group of riders approached slowly, their movements graceful and confident. The horses were well trained, their riders upright and steady. The sun rose behind them, turning their silhouettes golden. It was a powerful sight. James stood still as they drew closer. He didn't reach for anything, didn't step back. He had nothing to hide. Naya walked forward, her head high, her steps light and strong. As the riders arrived, something remarkable happened. They stopped a few yards away, climbed down from their horses, and bowed their heads to her. It wasn't a gesture of fear. It was a gesture of deep respect. James's eyes widened. He had guessed Naya was someone important, but he hadn't expected this. A tall man with silver strands in his dark hair stepped forward. He wore soft leather clothing, beautifully made, and carried himself with quiet authority. His eyes were kind, but his presence was strong. He looked at Naya, and in that moment James saw a spark in her eyes he had not seen before. A spark of home. The man spoke in her language, words that James couldn't understand but could feel. There was warmth, relief, and something like joy. Naya answered him softly, her voice steady. The others stood behind, watching her with respect and care. Then she turned toward James and spoke slowly in English so he could understand. "This is my father," she said. "He is the leader of my people." James felt a rush of surprise. The quiet young woman he had taken in was not just someone passing through. She was the daughter of a respected tribal chief. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strength. Her calmness wasn't distance. It was dignity. The chief stepped closer to James. He didn't carry any weapon. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke of power, but his eyes held warmth, not anger. He looked at James for a long moment as if seeing the truth of who he was without needing to ask questions. Then he placed a hand over his heart, a sign of respect. Naya translated softly, "He thanks you. You kept me safe." James nodded, feeling something shift inside him. "I just did what was right," he said. Her father spoke again. This time Naya's eyes softened as she translated. "He says what you did was more than right. You gave me back to my people." The group invited James to their camp not far from his land. At first James hesitated. He wasn't used to being a guest in anyone's world. But Naya looked at him with quiet trust, and that was enough. They rode together through the open land. The path wound through fields of tall grass, soft hills, and scattered trees. Birds flew overhead, their wings catching the sunlight. James had traveled through this country many times, but it felt different now, like he was seeing it through Naya's eyes. When they reached the camp, James was struck by its beauty. Tents made of strong decorated cloth stood in neat circles. Children played near a stream. Women prepared food near a fire. Men tended horses that moved gracefully like dancers. The air was filled with warmth, laughter, and the smell of bread baking over the fire. It wasn't a place of fear or mystery. It was a home. Naya was welcomed back with open arms. People touched her hands, smiled at her, and whispered her name like it was something precious. James stood quietly watching, understanding now why she carried herself the way she did. She wasn't just a young woman. She was someone her people loved deeply. That night, the tribe held a small gathering in her honor. The fire crackled softly as people sat in a wide circle under the stars. The chief stood and spoke in a deep, steady voice. Naya translated some of it for James. "He is telling them what happened," she whispered. "He is telling them how you accepted me when I had nowhere to go." James felt the attention of many eyes on him. He wasn't used to being the center of anything. He looked down at the fire, feeling both humbled and strangely proud. The chief then walked over to James. He held a beaded necklace in his hand, beautifully crafted with tiny stones and colorful threads. Slowly, he placed it around James's neck. Naya explained, "This is a sign of trust. He is saying you are welcome among us." James swallowed hard. He had never received such a gift before. He didn't quite know what to say, so he simply nodded and said, "Thank you." Days passed, and James spent more time among Naya's people. He learned small words of their language, shared meals, and worked with their horses. He watched how they respected the land, how they moved with the rhythm of nature instead of against it. Slowly, they began to trust him not as an outsider, but as a friend. Naya often walked with him near the stream. She told him stories in her quiet, graceful way, stories about the stars, the seasons, and the strength of her people. James listened carefully, storing every word like a treasure. He had always thought of the land as something he lived on. Naya and her people made him see it as something to live with. One evening, as the sun set in a wash of orange and gold, Naya and James stood on a hill looking over the valley. She turned to him and said softly, "You changed everything." James shook his head gently.
"I didn't do much. You gave me my life back," she said.
Her voice was steady, but there was a deep warmth in it. "When I was taken away, I thought I might never see my people again. But you didn't let that happen. You chose kindness." James looked out at the valley, feeling the quiet strength of that moment. He had never thought of himself as someone special. He was just a man who lived simply, doing what felt right. But standing there, he realized that sometimes the smallest choices can change lives in the biggest ways. The chief approached them not long after. With Naya translating, he made James an offer. "He says," Naya explained, "you are welcome here always. You are part of our story now." James didn't have to think about it long. He didn't belong anywhere else as strongly as he did here now. The land felt like home, but this time not because of the quiet. It felt like home because of the people. Months later, James still worked his land, but it was no longer a lonely place. Naya visited often, and sometimes he stayed in her village. They shared meals, stories, and laughter. The bond between them grew, not through grand speeches, but through quiet trust. The people who once bowed to Naya as their leader now also greeted James as a friend. And though he remained the quiet cowboy, there was something new in his eyes, a calm sense of belonging. Naya, once traded away like something small, now stood taller than ever, her head high, her voice steady. She was the daughter of a chief, yes, but she was also a woman whose strength had never left her. James had not saved her. She had always been strong. He had simply been the bridge that brought her home, and in return she had given him something he had never expected to find, a place where his silence was not a wall, but a part of a shared peace.